Funding for this video is brought to you by viewers like you. Thank you.
With over 1,000 monsters to choose from in D&D, it can be hard to know which ones to use, and even harder to know how to play them. What weapons do they favor? What tactics do they use? How do they interact with other types of monsters? These are all questions that can come up to DMs that are looking to make their combats more enticing for their players. It's certainly one that I struggled with. That's why I'm back today with another monster breakdown for D&D. Hello again everyone, I'm Bill from AltRoll, and today I'm going to dive into a brief history of a D&D creature, how that history was adapted into 5th edition, and how this lore can help game masters make their combat encounters better. So, whether you're here for the cool lore breakdown, or for the combat tactics, I'm hoping to give you a lot more to chew on when it comes to the monsters we face in D&D. For episode 25, let's examine a legendary creature from the Renaissance era, the Hippogriff. The Hippogriff traces its mythological origins to Ludovico Ariosto's 16th century poem, Orlando Furioso. Born from the pairing of a griffin with a mare, the Hippogriff was the steed of magicians and the wandering knight Ruggiero, who rode on the creature's back to free the princess Angelica. Said to be able to fly all around the world and even to the moon, hippogriffs were extremely fast. After their appearance in Orlando Furioso, the hippogriff took on various symbolic or artistic meanings. In some depictions, the hippogriff is said to even be a symbol of love, as its parents, the mare and the griffin, are natural enemies. As time went on, the hippogriff continued to be featured in various media as mounts or independent creatures, such as in the Harry Potter series, the Warhammer series, and of course, Dungeons & Dragons. One of the earliest creatures introduced in D&D, the hippogriff made its first appearance in the 1974 White Box set. Described as fierce fighters that attack with hooves and sharp beaks, it was a monstrous combination of eagle and equine features. It had the ears, neck, mane, torso, and hind legs of a horse, but the wings, forelegs, and face of an eagle. Its color would range between russet, golden tan, or a variety of browns, with feathers a different shade than the hide, and an ivory or golden yellow beak. According to their initial lore, hippogriffs lived in relatively unoccupied regions, hunting and grazing in areas from 10 to 40 square miles. As omnivorous creatures, hippogriffs would feed on whatever was available, whether that was greenery, fruit, or wildlife. They tended to shy away from carnivores, but did make an exception when hunting humanoids. As predators themselves, they were also prey to griffins, who favored them as a delicacy. As a result, hippogriffs gathered in large groups for protection, moving as a herd through their hunting grounds. The bodies of the creatures they hunted would be carried back to their nest, where the rest of the herd and young would feed. Most interesting of all, young hippogriffs could be captured and trained to serve as a steed, with their eggs selling for 1,000 gold pieces and live hippogriffs costing up to 3,000 gold pieces. While still difficult to train, they were less likely to eat their rider than a griffin was, so they had their own pros and cons. Hippogriffs continued to be a staple in subsequent D&D monster manuals, appearing in 1st edition's Monster Manual in 1977, 2nd edition's Monstrous Compendium Volume 2 in 1989, 3rd edition's Monster Manual in 2000, and 4th edition's Monster Manual under the Griffin entry in 2008. While their lore received minor tweaks across the editions, they remained a lesser monster beneath griffins, as well as an exotic mount option for brave adventurers. In 5th edition, a hippogriff is a magical creature possessing the wings and forelimbs of an eagle, the hindquarters of a horse, and a head that combines the features of both animals. With unknown origins, hippogriffs are reclusive and omnivorous. Making their nest near plentiful food sources, hippogriffs rarely venture farther than a few miles from it. Their prior lore about moving in herds or packs is largely gone, though they can sometimes be encountered in pairs, traveling and hunting with their mate. Despite their front half being a griffin, they don't lay eggs, instead giving birth to their young live. While normally they may run away from a fight that's going pretty badly, when defending their nest, mate, or young, hippogriffs are fiercely territorial and will fight to the death. Despite their hulking size and danger to the average humanoid, hippogriffs are prey to larger predators of the skies, commonly hunted by dragons, griffins, and wyverns. Much like in prior editions, if captured and raised in captivity, a hippogriff can be trained to be a companion and mount. Of all the creatures that can serve as flying mounts, hippogriffs are considered the easiest to train, and are extremely loyal to their handlers. Now that we've examined their lore, let's pivot over to the hippogriff's stat block. The hippogriff is a large monstrosity, measuring around the same height and weight of a horse, though their wingspan may make them a bit bigger. Mechanically, they take up 10 feet on a battle map, and being a monstrosity, they're generally viewed as just monsters, with no specific category or race to speak of. We'll get to their mental scores later, but hippogriffs don't maintain the capacity for rational thought, acting similar to wild beasts. As such, their alignment is unaligned, lacking any sense of morals or ethics. Their stats emphasize mobility over tankiness, with a low armor class of 11 and 3d10 plus 3 hit points for an average of 19, but they have a movement speed of 40 feet and a flying speed of 60 feet. In terms of their ability scores, they generally have high strength, dexterity, constitution, and wisdom, with strength being the highest, and low intelligence and charisma. Creatures with intelligence scores lower than 4 are generally considered bestial in nature, and don't really have the capacity for things like morals, ethics, or critical thinking skills. As a CR1 monster, they have a basic proficiency bonus of +2, but their only other bonus they get to skills is their perception, where they get a whopping +5 to their rolls. This is likely to help them spot potential prey while flying through the skies, making it very hard for a party to hide from a hungry hippogriff. This bonus is doubled by their keen sight ability, which grants advantage on perception checks relying on sight. In combat, they make 2 attacks per turn, a beak attack and a claw attack. These are both melee attacks with a +5 to hit, but the beak does 1d10 plus 3 piercing damage, while the claws do 2d6 plus 3 slashing damage. Lastly, we have their environment tags. Hippogriffs tend to be found in grassland, hill, and mountain biomes. Now that we've gone through and sorted out their stat block, let's relate the hippogriff's lore and abilities to how they behave in combat. To do this, we're going to take their lore and stat block and combine that with some presumptions about monster behavior from Keith Amon's The Monsters Know What They're Doing. The first of Amon's assumptions is that most creatures want to survive, and if seriously wounded, will try to flee combat, though there are exceptions to that rule. If we assume seriously wounded to be 1/3 of the creature's health, that threshold for the hippogriff would be rounded to 6. Generally speaking, beasts attack while hunting for food, and while there can be exceptions where they're trained as mounts or enthralled by some big bad evil guy, wild hippogriffs are not going to keep attacking a potential meal if it starts seriously wounding it. Therefore, if reduced to 6 hit points or fewer, a hippogriff will try to disengage from a fight, using its high movement and flight speeds to escape. Next up, we look at their alignment. As bestial monstrosities, alignment doesn't really come into play with their decision-making. Like all beasts, they'll be territorial around their nest or their young, but unless they're being directed by some other creature, they'll generally try to kill the creatures they fight. There could be instances where they try to take a creature back alive to its nest though, such as bringing a warm, fresh meal back to its babies. With alignment sorted, let's look at their mental ability scores in greater detail. Hippogriffs have an intelligence score of 2. With regards to intelligence scores of 7 or less, Amon states that these creatures operate off instinct alone, and can't really adjust their tactics on the fly in combat. For Hippogriffs, this just reinforces their behavior as beasts, flying in from the sky to pounce on a potential meal, with no real strategy to speak of. On top of that, Hippogriffs have a wisdom score of 12. With regards to wisdom scores of 12 or 13, Amon states that these creatures choose their targets carefully, and may refrain from combat if it seems unwinnable. Despite not being very smart, Hippogriffs are good at picking out easy targets, using their high perception to spot them before they realize they're being hunted. After all, Hippogriffs are motivated by food, and why risk a tough fight with an ogre when there's perfectly good farmers and travelers to eat? With their mindset sorted, let's look at their physical stats that influence how they fight. Hippogriffs have at least a +1 in all their physical stats, with strength having a +3. While I've never personally seen a hippogriff wield a longbow, their stats focus on their natural melee strikes, using claw and beak attacks to defeat their foes. Couple that with their high speed and low defensive stats, the hippogriff really excels as a hit-and-run predator, flying by to deal some good damage, then flying out of melee range before ending their turn. One tactic that I like to use when my players are taunting me that combat is too easy is to have the hippogriff fly in and grapple a target with their high strength modifier. Once grappled, the hippogriff will fly up as far as their speed will allow, and then let go. On flat terrain, the fall damage from a height of 30 feet would be 3d6, and if they survive, that creature is prone until the start of their next turn. But if engaging a hippogriff in a mountainous or hilly area where there are bigger drops, well, try not to get grappled. The last major premise from Amon is that any creature gets their movement, action, bonus action, and reaction. Any creature that exists in D&D will have evolved in accordance with this rule, and will combine their movement, actions, bonus actions, and reactions to maximize their action economy. Unfortunately for the hippogriff, they don't get any innate bonus actions, but that doesn't mean that we still can't maximize how their other features work. If the combat arena allows, the hippogriff will prefer to stay in the air, using their flying speed to maneuver in and out of combat. If forced to stay on the ground, their 40 feet speed and large size will still keep them able to chase down or run away from ground targets. Once in melee, their best damage option is to use their multi-attack, dealing around 18 damage per turn on average with their claws and beak. They do also have that drop attack they can do while flying, but the damage from that would only be better than their melee attacks if they can drop someone from a height of 50 feet or greater. So if there aren't any big drops like that around, they'll tend to stick to their multi-attack. After using their action to attack, the hippogriff's best bet is to try and get back out of melee range, using their flight or movement speed to skirmish with enemies. If unable to take down an opponent with one turn of attacks, their low armor class leaves them vulnerable to attacks of opportunity. However, those generally result in less damage than a full round of melee attacks, so the hippogriff may still choose to fly away after attacking. At low levels, the effectiveness of this strategy can vary, since most player characters don't have extra attack yet. But at higher levels, taking one opportunity attack is often a better choice than facing a raging barbarian with 2 reckless Great Axe attacks ready to go. On subsequent turns, they'll keep repeating this process of diving in and out to deal damage until their targets go down, or until they get seriously wounded, at which point they will attempt to fly away. If they're fighting in their nest, or fighting alongside their mate or young, they'll instead fight to the bitter end, and may be a little more reckless and aggressive with how they maneuver in combat. With their action economy explained and min-maxed, let's finish up this section by looking at how they work when fighting in a group. As stated in their lore, most hippogriffs keep to themselves, but they can be encountered with their mate. When 2 hippogriffs fight together, their nature as unintelligent monstrosities means they wouldn't really act any differently. While they may split their focus on separate targets rather than both focus on the same enemy, they will use the same strategies as they would if fighting alone. The biggest difference is that if hippogriffs are fighting in a pair, it's likely that they're mates, and as such they will fight to the death rather than run away. So, with all of that laid out and applied to hippogriffs, what do we now know about how to use them in our encounters? First, hippogriffs are flying predators that hunt others for food. While not the most dangerous creature of the skies, still being food for dragons and griffins, they're still a credible threat to unprepared or weaker travelers. Second, making their nests in elevated areas, hippogriffs will hunt indiscriminately in the immediate area. As unaligned beasts, they don't really care whether what they eat is good or evil, treating anything weak enough to be killed as a potential meal, and anything strong enough to fight back as someone else's problem. Third, in combat, hippogriffs will fly in and out of melee range, using their claws and beak to take down opponents before flying back out of range. If the environment allows for it, they may choose to grab enemies off the ground and drop them from great heights, letting fall damage do their dirty work. But they would only do this if it would end up doing more damage than their multi-attack. Fourth, if reduced to 6 hit points or fewer, a hippogriff will begin to flee combat with their high movement and flying speed. When defending their nest, mate, or young, however, they will fight to the death. Fifth, if hippogriffs win a combat encounter, they're likely to kill and eat their defeated foes. They act like wild beasts after all, and while some may choose to carry unconscious creatures to their nest in order to feed their young, they don't really have enough intelligence to understand concepts like mercy or prisoners. With that, we come to the end of today's video on the hippogriff. A lower tier monstrosity, the hippogriff is an interesting threat for low-level adventurers, or an exotic mount option for higher tier parties. While their lore and special abilities are rather bare, they can still be dangerous when in their natural environment, using hills and mountains to their advantage. However, what I want to know is, what do you think of the hippogriff? Do you think they're a good monster for parties to face, or are these horse-bird hybrids kind of underwhelming? You can let me know down in the comments, or you can discuss it on the Alt-Roll Discord using the link in the description. If you want to support Alt-Roll, you can visit our Ko-fi link in the description to leave a one-time or recurring donation. And make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to be notified when our videos go live. However, that's all I had for you. Thank you all for watching, make sure to have a great rest of your day, and I'll see all of you next time.